Hello, my name is Marcus Katz. I'm the author of Tarosophy and The Magister, and with co-author Tali Goodwin, Secrets of the Waite-Smith Tarot, and about 50 other books on tarot. And today it's my pleasure to review and introduce to you the Pamela Colman Smith, The Untold Story, published by US Games 2018. This is a monumental and lifetime accomplishment book and is essential, recommended for every reader of tarot and enthusiast for the history of tarot and the remarkable life of Pamela Colman Smith, to whom we owe such an incredible debt for her legacy with the Waite-Smith Tarot. Now, this is an interesting book because it's a huge collection from the Library of Stuart Kaplan and also from libraries and institutions including the National Trust and the Royal Shakespeare Company and a number of other private collectors, institutions, academies, libraries, museums around the world, all contributing information to one collection. So this is the first time so much information and artwork has been collected about Pamela in one place, and it's absolutely essential as a result. Now, the interesting thing about it, though, is it's Pamela Colman Smith's story as opposed to the tarot story. So whilst the tarot is fairly fundamental to Pamela's life and work, for her it was only what Arthur Edward Waite called a delightful experiment. It only occupied 5 months of her life, and almost immediately after she converted to Roman Catholicism. So it's interesting to consider whether she would want to necessarily be remembered for this little part of her life and this big job for little cash that she embarked upon. But nonetheless, that's how we've come to know her. And so it's a fascinating romp through her life. Now, the book is 440 pages. I made some notes, so I'll make sure that I cover what I would like to introduce of the book. It's 440 pages, it's hardback, it has a wonderful cover. The artwork here is by Alpheus P. Cole in 1906. So about 3 years before Pamela actually painted the tarot, this is what she looked like. And here is a typical pose that she would have had when she was telling stories, which she did as a living, as a part-time living. She told stories, and we have lots of newspaper reports of her supporting singers and dancers by getting onto the stage and telling stories by candlelight, usually folk stories, pirate stories, children's stories, and stories from Jamaica. And one of the interesting things, first of all, about the book is, well, let's take the contributors first. So a lot of this is from Stuart Kaplan's private library. He has a huge collection of Pamela Colman Smith's possessions after her death, and one of those is the Visitor's Book, which is featured very heavily in this present volume. We also have work and contributions from Mary K. Greer, Elizabeth Foley O'Connor, who is writing a literary biography of Pamela Colman Smith called Pamela Colman Smith, An Artistic Life, which we look forward to being published, and Melinda Boyd Parsons, who is a retired professor of art history and has had a lifetime interest in Pamela Colman Smith as well. So these are people with a passion for Pamela Colman Smith and whose research has contributed to this overall book. Now, the book is broken into a number of sections. You'll see that I've highlighted them here. And the bulk of the section is work from 1896 to 1946 and is a total collection of Pamela's output during that time. Because we know that Pamela was very prolific. She had a very unruly approach to business, life, and artwork, but she was nonetheless prolific. This is why she could paint and draw 78 tarot cards, 80 designs in total, for the tarot deck in such a short period of time. So the book is gorgeous throughout. It has these illustrations, which I think are from the National Trust at Small Hythe Cottage in Tenterden, here at the front on the inside cover. And we have the Pamela Colman Smith frontispiece from the portrait by Alpheus P. Cole, and a wonderful sketch of her here. And if you'd like to watch through the whole of this video, or even if you must skip forward to the end, I have a rare illustration and photograph of Pamela Colman Smith that hasn't been seen before, that is also not included in this book as an extra bonus for bearing with me while I go through the wonderful contents of the present book here. So what we have is at the front, we have a collection of her early artwork and things like her toy theatre that we can see here, which we think is very influential on her work with the tarot, and a general biography of her life, which does cover her unusual appearance and the confusion that people had about her actual appearance, ethnicity, cultural background, and so forth. The jury is still out on this. However, it is very useful to have eyewitness accounts, people's descriptions of meeting her, as an insight to her appearance, her personality, and her sense of humour, and the way she approached things. And this is all included in the biography, which covers a reasonable section of the first part of the book here. And it's illustrated all the way to the first publication of the Waite-Smith Tarot, the delightful experiment that she was involved with. And it's fully illustrated with incredible photographs of Pamela, some of which have only been seen by private collectors for quite a while. And so again, it's a gift to the tarot community, to the art community, to the history community, to have them all in one place. That we, for example, for our own book, Secrets of the Waite-Smith Tarot, we had to actually buy copies of the Delineator and various other journals of the time, which are rare nowadays, but here you've got them all and pages scanned from them. For example, the Green Sheaf, Pamela's publication here, all scanned in detail and virtually completely within one place. And here we can see the famous Hill of Heart's Desire, which we believe is the precursor for the entire tarot deck. Within this image, you can see about 15 tarot cards all in one landscape, and this was painted shortly before, several years before the Waite-Smith Tarot. So it's full of fascinating insights into Pamela's life and work, and also her poetry, which is like so. And all of this is in the biography, including her portraits of William Gillette, who played Sherlock Holmes, and who was related to Pamela. So there's a lot of fascinating information in here. It would be to do it an injustice to try and do this even in a sort of 20-minute review. You really do need to buy the book to see it all in one place. There's a physical thrill in seeing, for example, her visitor's book in full, as if you were in a library, a museum, or in this case in the offices of US Games, in order to actually hold this and see this in its original form. So that's really fascinating to have. And of course, to actually put it into context with Pamela's life. So the 1901 pages and the, if we find the visitor's book here, this covers 1901 to 1905, and Pamela was actually initiated into the Golden Dawn in 1901. So we can see almost running parallel. Again, I have to refer back to our own book, which I think is a great companion for this, because we cover slightly different parallels to Pamela's life, as well as the original primary source material that you can find stacked within this. The only issue that I would have with the book is one that I've already discussed with US Games, is an inevitable one, that even with a book of this size and this magnitude and this amount of work, it can't help but not be entirely comprehensive. Because, for example, there are a lot of newspaper articles that aren't quoted in here. There are some photographs, including some of Pamela's later life, that aren't included in here. But that's because once you've made a book this big, to make it even slightly bigger would risk the cost of it skyrocketing and making it unaffordable to most people other than hard-bitten academics who sort of shrug their shoulders and pay, $160 for an academic book without flinching. Well, actually, we do flinch, but it's far better to have a close to comprehensive book that's still affordable to most people in order to get the actual Untold story out there. As I mentioned, the bulk of the book is 1896 to 1946 work by Pamela, and this includes illustrations for calendars, illustrations for posters, illustrations for book covers, and so forth, that most people won't have actually seen, and show the full extent of Pamela's work, and also give you a sense of the design that she would tend to take with her artwork. There are also copies of letters to actually illustrate the development of Pamela's life through that time. However, it's generally uncommented on, so it acts more of a sort of photographic journal as opposed to an actual biography. However, there are things like, for example, we see in 1907, the illustration just here. Let me see if I can get that right. As you can see, it's a very big book, so I'm having difficulties holding it up. And you can see maybe precursors here to things like the Three of Cups in the Tarot. And I'm very fascinated by some of the illustrations around this time, while she was involved with the Golden Dawn, because they are blatantly referring to initiatory type experiences that Pamela would have had within the order itself. So, for example, this one. And I think it's fascinating to see the esoteric experience of entry into the Golden Dawn being illustrated through Pamela's own eyes. So here from the Philadelphia Museum of Art is an untitled drawing from 1907, when she was still, she didn't go very far in the Golden Dawn. She went from neophyte to celator in about 5 years. So here on this side, we can see the pillars, robes, and some mystical experience taking place within Pamela's perspective. Now, the book concludes towards the end of the materials in about 1946 with this painting here called Duet. And so that makes up the sort of bulk of the book from here to here. So it's a catalogue, a collection of primary source material of use to researchers. I think one of the issues that we all have with Pamela Colman Smith is that tarot was actually not a big part of her life, whereas it is a big part of our lives as tarot card readers, students, authors, and teachers. So where I think the book is, this particular book is slightly weaker, it's towards the end, where we take a look at influences and expression in the Rider-Waite Tarot deck, which I think was written by Melinda Boyd Parsons. And this is where we start to cover the tarot right at the very last few pages of the book. And this is where we all have to apply some sort of guesswork or inspired intuition or a little bit of I don't know the right word for it, but best guess scenarios to what we think Pamela was trying to paint or where the designs came from within the tarot itself. And I have to say that I do disagree slightly with a number of the points that are made towards the back of this book, but that's subject to interpretation. For example, there's some work on the Ten of Swords. Again, I think this section is written by Melinda Boyd Parsons that I would tend to disagree with, but I would want to show my own working and the research that Tali and I did in our book, which is Secrets of the Waite-Smith Tarot, in order to compare and contrast how different people approach the cards. And there isn't a right answer because, of course, we don't know until someone comes up with Pamela Colman Smith's notebook of 1909, the summer of 1909, if such a notebook ever existed. We're all going to guess at why she painted the Ten of Swords with the papal symbol being made by the character's hand. And again, I'd recommend looking at a number of different approaches, different books, in order to come to your own conclusion. And that's all it will be. It will be your opinion as to who is actually the figure on the Nine of Pentacles, or who is actually the Queen of Wands. Because Pamela's artwork does lend itself to a simplicity of expression that allows us to read into it whatever we want. This is why it works well as a tarot deck, but it's also why it's very frustrating in terms of trying to work out clearly who she was depicting and for why. So that's just a brief little section towards the end of the book, because then we turn to the addendum, and at the back of the book is a very important addendum, a primary source material again, and that includes Pamela's birth and death certificate, articles by Pamela, the original black and white illustrations from the brochure advertising the deck, which show how Pamela probably originally drew the pictures, closer to any redrawing of them in subsequent versions of the deck. And a larger picture of her passport photo, which I've been looking to see for quite a long time, so I'm very glad to see that has made the cut for this. The burial record of Imbued, which is at St Michael and All the Angels Church, Imbued, where she was buried, and her last will and testament, even down to the list of items that were auctioned upon her death. So again, it's an entirely comprehensive overview of her life and her work. And if it tells an untold story, then I guess it tells the story of her I guess it tells a story of her simplicity, of the fact that she was an artist and she produced art, and she had an eye for design that could tell a story in a very simple approach. And yet some of her artwork is very layered and very subtle and very mystical. And that dynamic between those two ends of the spectrum, I think, really gives some complexity to her life. I think as well, towards the end, I feel a little bit sad somehow when I see the copies of her hymn books and cuttings from the Catholic faith, not because of the Catholic faith at all, but just because I guess it makes me feel of a more elderly person, almost like, sort of cutting out these clippings as inspiration. Although I guess nowadays someone would do this on Pinterest. However, it closes her life towards the end of the book, and so it therefore tells a true, I guess, untold story of Pamela's life by looking at her artwork. Because whilst we have some of her articles, whilst we have some of her writings, whilst we have several pieces of newspaper articles and people who met her, their accounts as well, she still remains, even to the people who met her, somewhat of an enigma. And I guess the untold story is also of her art and a life told through art. She lived through her art, and she continues to do so. In every single tarot reading, her illustration of the Hill of Heart's Desire is shuffled into a new arrangement to tell someone else's life. And so as an artist, I don't think she could have asked for any better legacy. So I'd highly recommend this book. Excuse me. I did want to read something from a newspaper article that I don't think is included in the book, but says, even with the prestige of English approval, Miss Smith's instant success here at the gallery is a bit unusual. I think, says the author of this newspaper article, it is largely due to her absence of all pose. Queer, unexpected, absolutely original as Miss Smith is, one realises her quite unmistakable genuineness as well as appreciates her talents. She is a gentlewoman, presenting an odd type of thoroughly unconventional femininity, and therein lies her greatest charm. And I think that unconventionalness, her originalness, her queer, unexpected absence of pose is found testament in this book, Pamela Colman Smith, The Untold Story, by Stuart R. Kaplan, with Mary Kay Greer, Elizabeth Foley O'Connor, Melinda Boyd Parsons, and highly recommended. Essential to anyone with an interest in the tarot, in the artwork, and in the history of this remarkable woman to whom we owe so much. And I just wanted to close this review with a photograph of her in later life with Edie, Chris and Tony, three of her lifetime friends who were visiting her in Cornwall, and this photo was taken in circa 1932. Currently unpublished or unshown, and one of a number of photographs that are as yet to make it into an entirely comprehensive, massively expensive book of the far off future. And here is the picture, and you can see that Pamela is shading her eyes here with her left hand, and you might not be able to make it out in the photograph, but she's holding a pair of spectacles in her right hand. And I'd like to think of Pamela in this picture towards the last years of her life, in good company with friends, and enjoying the late English sunshine, or perhaps the autumn when this photograph was taken. There's also some pictures of her at the beach with those friends in swimming costumes, so I guess it was the summer that was taken. So again, Pamela Colman Smith, The Untold Story, US Games publication, a lifetime work, a masterful piece of collation and essential reading for every student and every reader of the tarot who wants to understand one of the greatest inspirations and influences on our modern art in our history as well. Okay, so I hope you found that interesting, and I look forward to any of your comments on the book. If you join the Tarosophy Tarot Association, of course, you can engage in discussions on the book and find out even more information with all of our courses on tarot as well. So there's a link down below, and we look forward to seeing you in the Tarot Association at any future point. Bye from me.